The core elements of soldiering really hasn't changed much over the centuries. Certainly the technology and the apparatus of warfare and the training have changed quite a bit, but the basic commitments to duty and discipline and authority and loyalty haven't changed. I'm a Roman centurion. The word centurion comes from the Latin centum, meaning 100. I have command over 100 men. But today I want to tell you a story of how one man took control of me in the most unlikeliest of ways. Because of what I have witnessed, I now find my duty and my delight to obey this new authority, this new superior officer in my life. My loyalty is now to a king and to a kingdom not of this realm. To help you all grasp who I am, or as I like to say now, who I was, it's important for you to have a proper grasp of my role in the well-oiled machine called the Roman army. To keep things running as smooth as possible, my colleagues and I flex the power of Rome's will. We're often referred to as the backbone of the army. My rank was actually the highest rank that an ordinary soldier could achieve. Promotion to my office was usually based on experience and knowledge, and just as in your military today, the higher the rank, the higher the responsibility. And much like many of you can attest to, sometimes the best way to learn things is in the school of hard knocks. My colleagues and I, at least most of us, earned our ranks the hard way. But even though the way was hard, most of us agree that the payoff upon arriving at our position has been worth it. Prestige, power, honor. Commanding respect, demanding obedience. Flexing the muscles of our authority inflicted fear into the hearts of those who found themselves under our oppression and our jurisdiction. In times of combat, I was in charge of implementing military strategy. I would always be on point, leading the charge into battle. Away from the battlefield, I administered discipline in the ranks. I didn't like doing it, but often I would have to mediate interpersonal conflicts among my men. I provided security and protection when called upon. I supervised police actions in occupied areas. And I made sure justice was upheld for condemned criminals who deserved execution. I oversaw matters pertaining to life and death on a daily basis, but there was one execution that I oversaw that undid everything I believed about life and death matters. It was both the strangest and the most glorious day of my life, certainly one that I will never forget. I had seen countless executions, and I heard the cries of the condemned before, but nothing compares to what I witnessed in the early morning hours and into the afternoon that day. The day began like any other day. I was stationed in Jerusalem. I was overseeing the duties of the soldiers, making sure that the order of things was kept. It was a busy time, Passover. There were so many crowds everywhere, people swarming in the streets and shouting and praying and celebrating their traditions. But amidst all the noise, something felt just different. There was an unease in the air, as if the city itself was just holding its breath. My men and I were given orders that day to carry out the crucifixion of 3 men. Crucifixion was a punishment reserved for the most detestable people like rebellious slaves, criminals, and defeated foes of the Roman Empire. And 3 men were destined to die that day by crucifixion. The one in the middle, Jesus, they called him, was said to be a king. Now, he didn't seem like a king in any way to me. No wealth, no power. Just a twisted, mocking crown of thorns placed, shoved, adorned on his head. He was nothing like the leaders in my empire, yet the people, his followers, 1 week earlier treated him like some kind of savior, but then they demanded that he be crucified. These people are so fickle in their commitments. It didn't surprise me how they flip-flopped. It wasn't odd to me. But what was odd was that I had no idea why they would think of him as a king. I'd seen kings before, true kings. This man did not fit that mold. How could they be so mistaken? At the beginning of the day, I was mistaken as well, but all that was about to change. You see, when they brought him to us, he was already bruised and broken and bloodied from the beatings. He was in bad shape because of the floggings. Flogging is an astonishing and unbelievable form of punishment. The intent is meant to exact the maximum amount of suffering. They would use a whip that consisted of 9 leather thongs laced with metal balls that would tear into the flesh of the one receiving the blows. And with every lash given, the victim's muscles and their veins were exposed underneath hanging ribbons of flesh. 39 strikes were administered to Jesus that day, and those lashes laced him from shoulder to leg. Most victims at this point would start the process of dying as their blood pressure would surely drop and their kidneys would fail to function properly. In fact, their whole anatomy would be in a readied state of shock as bodily fluid started oozing out of all the cuts and the contusions. His condition was critical, even before I oversaw what my team of men was supposed to do to him. We were going to crucify him. Crucifixion was the most horrendous invention of the Roman machine. The infliction of pain that the victim sustained, every time it made me shudder. The crowds were loud, spitting at him, jeering. His accusers, the priests and the elders, they all stood by, watching with grim satisfaction as the death march began. He was gifted a beam of wood to carry over 100 yards and up a hill called the Skull. And the weight of the beam combined with his fatigued and scarred frame made him fall a few times along the way. So we seized a man from Cyrene and commanded him to carry the cross, the supposed king's cross, until he and him and the angry mob following them, until they all reached the top of this execution hill. They were all so angry. They were all so against him. And my soldiers then pinned his back to the crossbeam. They stretched out his arms and his hands, and they proceeded to grab a hammer and some spikes. 7-inch long spikes were driven into the fleshy part of his wrist. You know, the part between the 2 bones of the forearms. That spot had enough structural integrity to bear the weight of a body for a long time. And as they nailed him to the cross, the sound was sickening. The sickening crack of metal digging into flesh and past bone. His lips were trembling and his eyes were strained from the pain. And I don't know what drew my special attention to him. Maybe it was the way that he bore his pain. I've seen men break in the face of such suffering before, but not him. He didn't beg to be released. He simply endured. His feet were then placed one on top of the other, and a third nail locked him into place. Then after the horizontal beam was secured to a vertical post, we hoisted him high in the air while the crowd mockingly chanted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" The air grew thick. It grew thick with the stench of blood and sweat. But Jesus just hung there, his chest heaving and collapsing. It rose and fell with every slow, labored breath. As I took it all in, I could barely swallow myself. It was too intense. I'm not sure if there are words to describe the type of anguish that we all witnessed that day. We were all just watching him hang, broken and exposed. There's actually more that I could say, but simply I can't bear to at the moment. I'm sorry. Well then, when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. The sky changed. It grew dark, unnaturally dark. And for a moment I thought it was the beginning of a storm, but no rain came. The heaviness that was coming down was a weight that gripped every heart and even the land itself. It was so unnatural that I can't explain the feeling that came over us. I think we all sensed something was shifting in the world that we all knew. One of their Hebrew prophets once said, "And on that day, declares the Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. And I will turn your feasts into mourning and all of your songs into lamentation. I will bring sackcloth on every waist and baldness on every head, and I will make it like the mourning of an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day." That wasn't what it felt like. That is what we were experiencing. The dark clouds didn't produce any rain, but a downpour of judgment seemed to be imminent. And as we arrived at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" At the time, the word seemed strange to me. But later on, I learned that this was one of the most popular lines from one of their Psalms of Lament. This indeed was a lamentable, grievous situation that we were all in. His cry was one of desperation. He was expressing and experiencing something that we have all felt at times, even though now I've come to realize that God has never really forsaken any of us, just Him. We all heard the words coming out of his mouth. Some of them sounded garbled and slurred. Given the agony he was experiencing, I'm surprised that anything he said was intelligible. What did he say? Eloi, Eloi. And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he's calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come take him down." Elijah was a prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel during the reigns of Ahab and Ahaziah. Many of the Jews in my day assumed that Elijah would return and herald the coming of the Messiah at the end of the age. And some of the Jews witnessing this must have connected all the talks of Jesus being the Messiah with Elijah being the Messiah's forerunner. And it was said in their scriptures that Elijah did not die, but that his God came and took him in a chariot to heaven. And so these onlookers must have been wondering, perhaps mockingly, if Elijah would provide a similar so-called rescue from death for Jesus. And so one of them, offered to Jesus a drink. But the offering wasn't a soothing concoction, it was bitter, it was sour wine. It was like they were mockingly giving him poison for food and for his thirst giving him sour wine to drink. It was intentionally adding insult to injury, is what it was. And then the final moment came. And Jesus uttered a loud cry, and he breathed his last. I shuddered as the sound waves of his voice vibrated in the marrow of my bones. The whole earth shook, and it felt like all of creation was on the cusp of crumbling because of his cry. The entire world was being set off balance. And then it happened. Jesus, this man who endured so much, finally gave up his spirit. He breathed his last, and all the air around us grew thick, and it was so still and so silent. I was told by one of my men that at that precise moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. I've been often stationed at that temple in Jerusalem. The Jews loved that place. The temple was a place where the holy God of Israel dwelt physical in the midst of his children who were completely sinful. The Jews would have to travel in past the outer court and the brazen altar and the water basin. They would pass the candlestick gold and the showbread and the incense until they hit the final separation, the curtain, crafted for one reason, to keep out those guilty of high treason to their God. Crimson, gold. And according to the stories that the rabbis of old told, it was as thick as a man's hand. The separating barrier between holy God and sinful man, 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, that had remained unchanged until this bleeding man before me yelled out, "Tetelestai," which means it is finished. And at that moment, the curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. That's what they reported to me. The curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. It was like when this guy died, a new living way had been opened up for us all to have direct access to the Creator himself. The ripped curtain, along with what this fellow had previously said about the impending destruction of the temple itself, compelled me to think that maybe when this man breathed his last, he had done something significant for me. And so I looked at his body one last time, hanging there like a rag doll. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if I had just witnessed the death of someone who was more than just a man. My knees weakened. My chest tightened as I looked up at him. I stared up at him, his limp body, his head bowed. And in that moment, the weight of everything crashed down on me. heavier than any armor that I had ever worn. This was no mere man. This was no ordinary criminal. Surely this was history's most awful moment and wonderful moment combined. I could see from his head, from his hands and his feet, sorrow and love flowing mingled down, and a shiver went up my spine as I imagined his pain while witnessing his wounds, and my heart was pierced. And rising from the inner chamber of my being, I felt the most unexpected of confessions rising up within me, and it could not be suppressed, because I had become convinced as I stood facing him and saw that in this way he breathed his last. I said, truly, this man was the Son of God. And when I spoke those words, I felt something inside me break. Something inside of me ripped open, and I was filled to the brim with a calm assurance that although I was complicit in the awful events of that terrible day, my wrongdoings wouldn't be credited to my account on Judgment Day. I'm not sure how to describe the assurance and the newness that I felt, but it was like I was being born again with life from above into God's own family divine. It was like I was justified fully through this offering of love and given a new standing with God that was mine. The transaction was so quickly made when as a sinner I came and I took of his offer. Somehow, this man saved me. And I'm telling you today what I confessed that day. Truly, this man is the Son of God. The cross has reordered all of my vanities. It's reordered all of my values, and it's canceled all of my vanities. The love I witnessed was so amazing and it was so divine that it demanded that I give Him my soul, my life, and my all. And I suggest to you that you do the same. Give Him your everything, just as He has given everything for you. Well, my time is almost up with you today. But I want to share a few final details that I believe are important to the events of the day. You see, there were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him, and there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. You see, in the patriarchal society that I was a part of, it was actually rare to see someone attribute such worth and value to women. There was a large group of women that made up his regular band of disciples. And although this large group of women stayed at a guarded distance from Jesus while he hung humiliated on the cross, at least they were there to witness it. They stood in stark, courageous, and loyal contrast to all of his male disciples who deserted him. All the women were doing that day was watching from a distance that day. But really, there was nothing more that they could do. This man was destined for death. But all that they were required to do that day, they did. They watched so that they could be a witness for what would follow in a few days' time. And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of their council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. You see, the body of someone executed was by law not allowed to be exposed overnight, and with the Sabbath day approaching, the work of removal couldn't be done on that day, so it had to be done before the sunset. And so off Joseph went to Pilate. And Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died. And so he summoned and asked me whether he was already dead, and I just told him that he was dead. And then he granted the corpse to Joseph. And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. Well, I don't mean to really keep you in suspense, but I really do need to get going. My time is up for today. I do want to thank you for giving me a few moments of your time so that I could tell you what I witnessed, my story that forever changed me. He deserves my everything because he gave his everything for me. He deserves my soul, my life, and my all. I started off by telling you that I'm a Roman centurion. I am one who rose up in the ranks because of my obedience and discipline and loyalty to Rome. I'm still a Roman centurion, but that's just my day job. It's no longer my identity. My loyalty is to a king not of this realm, and one day we will all see him in all of his glory. And until then, I will remain obedient and loyal to the King of all kings. I really do got to get going now. I would love to finish telling the story, but I guess you'll just have to come back next week. And maybe someone more strapping and handsome than myself will finish it off for you. Let's pray.